In the winter of 1873, the German immigrant community in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, started to talk about 11-year-old Emma Richter. She was a quiet, pale child with an unusual gift. Emma could quickly calculate the day of the week for any given date in history, memorize entire conversations after hearing them just once, and even recite the exact number of steps between any two buildings in her neighborhood. While modern science might recognize this as a rare neurological condition, people back then saw it as either a divine blessing or something far more mysterious. As Emma began using her abilities to uncover hidden secrets, predict accidents, and reveal details about crimes no one else knew about, the community grew increasingly frightened. By the spring, 3 men were dead, a family had fled in fear, and Emma herself disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a journal full of mysterious numbers that no one dared to decode. The story of Emma Richter's chilling discoveries in Milwaukee's German Quarter begins with her family. The Richters, Heinrich and Greta, had come to America from Bavaria in 1861, bringing their young daughter Emma with them. They settled in Milwaukee, where Heinrich worked as a brewmaster at the Kellner Brewery, while Greta worked as a seamstress. Emma's early life seemed normal, except for her strange abilities. She was born prematurely during the difficult ocean voyage and survived, though she remained small and pale, with eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. From a young age, Emma showed remarkable memory. By the age of 4, she could repeat entire conversations she had overheard days earlier, even mimicking the exact accents of the speakers. She counted everything: the stitches in her mother's embroidery, the steps between their house and the bakery, the exact timing between the brewery whistles that marked the start and end of the workday. When Heinrich taught her basic math, she grasped concepts so quickly that she could solve problems faster than he could write them down. At first, the German community in Milwaukee was fascinated by Emma's talents. Some people, like the elderly Mrs. Brennan, were uneasy, believing Emma's abilities were unnatural. But Father Kohler, the local priest, saw them as a gift from God, a sign of divine wisdom. However, during the harsh winter of 1872, when the cold froze Lake Michigan, Emma's talents started to take a darker turn. She spent hours by the window watching the neighbors and observing their habits. She noticed patterns in their routines, such as the exact number of steps Mr. Kruger took when walking to the brewery, or the specific order in which Mrs. Fisher hung her laundry. These details might have been dismissed as the quirks of a strange child, but Emma soon began to share her observations in a way that made others feel uneasy. One cold February morning in 1873, while sitting at the kitchen table, Emma suddenly told her mother that Mr. Dietrich, a man who worked at the brewery, wouldn't come home that day and would die at exactly 2:14 p.m. Her mother was horrified, but Emma explained that Mr. Dietrich had been drinking heavily and his behavior had changed in a way she could predict. Emma's calm and certain tone made her parents uncomfortable, but they dismissed it as nonsense. Yet, later that day, Mr. Dietrich collapsed and died at the exact time Emma had predicted. Word quickly spread throughout the German Quarter. Some dismissed it as coincidence, but others began to wonder if Emma knew more than they realized. The Richter family became the subject of whispers and nervous glances as people began to wonder what else Emma might have observed. Father Kohler, who had once praised Emma's gifts, grew worried and suggested that Emma spend more time praying and less time observing the neighbors. He feared that her gift might be twisted for darker purposes. Concerned by the growing unease, Heinrich spoke to Emma. He asked her how she knew about Mr. Dietrich's death, and Emma calmly explained that she simply observed and counted the changes in his behavior. She explained that when someone increases their alcohol consumption and reduces their food intake, it puts a strain on the heart, which was what happened to Mr. Dietrich. Despite Emma's logical explanation, her parents couldn't shake the growing sense of dread surrounding her unusual abilities. Heinrich felt his blood run cold as Emma explained how she had calculated the exact time of Mr. Dietrich's death, based on his age, weight, and the symptoms she had observed. Her calm, matter-of-fact tone made it clear that she had thought this through, but it also made Heinrich deeply uncomfortable. He couldn't understand how his 11-year-old daughter knew such specific details about Mr. Dietrich's habits. "Emma, how could you know all this about him?" he asked, unable to hide his unease. "I observe everything, Papa," she replied. "Every day, every person, every pattern. Her words made Heinrich feel more unsettled than ever. He didn't want to hear about any more of her calculations, fearing the dark thoughts they might provoke. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was at work here, something beyond simple curiosity. The snow outside continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the world beyond their home. Inside, Emma lay quietly, her mind constantly processing the patterns of human behavior she had observed, calculating probabilities that no child should be aware of, let alone want to know. In the weeks following Mr. Dietrich's death, the mood in Milwaukee's German quarter began to shift. Emma's parents watched her with increasing concern as she continued her daily observations. Once a source of pride, Emma had become a source of growing worry for them. She had never been like the other children, preferring to sit quietly, counting and observing, rather than playing games or chatting with friends. Now, her observations were becoming more detailed and far more disturbing. Greta began to notice that Emma was no longer just counting steps or measuring distances. She was speaking about the lives of their neighbors in ways that felt unnervingly precise. Emma casually mentioned that Mrs. Weber had been meeting secretly with Mr. Kellner behind the brewery for weeks, or that the Schneider family had been burying something in their garden every Sunday. When Greta asked how she could possibly know these things, Emma would simply say that she had observed the patterns. People think they are being secret, Emma explained one morning as she buttered her bread, but they follow patterns, just like numbers. Heinrich grew increasingly worried about Emma's behavior. That evening, after she had gone to bed, he sat down with Greta, his voice serious. "Greta, this cannot continue. Emma is becoming unnatural. Children should not be observing these things, and they certainly shouldn't be speaking of them so coldly." Greta, trembling as she mended a shirt, nodded. "I'm frightened, Heinrich. Not of Emma, but of what people will think. Already, the neighbors look at us strangely. Mrs. Brennan crossed the street yesterday when she saw me, and Father Collar, he hasn't visited since Jan's death." Their fears were confirmed 3 days later when Emma made another chilling prediction. While helping her mother with dinner, Emma suddenly stopped and announced, "Mrs. Weber will be discovered tomorrow at 11 in the morning. Her husband will find her with Mr. Kellner in the brewery office. There will be violence." Greta dropped the potato peeler she was holding in shock. "Emma, you mustn't say such things." But Emma, with the same calm certainty she applied to her arithmetic, explained further. "Mrs. Weber has been arriving earlier every week. Mr. Kellner has been staying later. Tomorrow, Mr. Weber will return early because his horse is lame. I've been watching its gait for days. The variables will align, and it will happen tomorrow." Heinrich, listening from the doorway, felt a wave of dread wash over him. His daughter was not merely observing, she was predicting the future with terrifying accuracy. "How do you know about Mr. Weber's horse?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I count her steps when she passes our house," Emma replied matter-of-factly. The horse favored her right leg 53% of the time on March 1st. Today, it was 68%. Tomorrow, she'll be lame enough to slow down Mr. Weber's route. The next day, Emma's prediction came true. Mrs. Weber was discovered by her husband in a compromising position with brewery owner Ernst Kellner. The resulting confrontation led to a brutal altercation, with Kellner injured and Mrs. Weber badly beaten. The scandal shook the tight-knit community, but what truly disturbed everyone was the realization that Emma had predicted the entire sequence of events. Rumors began to spread quickly. The girl with the calculating eyes had not only foreseen Mr. Dietrich's death, but had also predicted the scandal involving Mrs. Weber and Mr. Kellner with unsettling accuracy. People began to whisper about Emma, the strange child who watched, calculated, and seemed to know things that no one else could understand. The Richter family became increasingly isolated. Neighbors avoided them at church, children were forbidden from playing near their house, and even the shopkeepers treated them with barely concealed suspicion. Heinrich's position at the brewery grew more tenuous, and Kellner, still recovering from the beating, made it clear that the Richter family was no longer welcome at social events. Despite the growing hostility, Emma remained unaffected. She continued her daily observations, her mind constantly calculating probabilities with mechanical precision. She began to keep a leather journal, filling its pages with numbers, dates, and detailed observations that her parents couldn't bring themselves to read. The sight of their 11-year-old daughter hunched over her notebook filled them with dread that they couldn't explain. As winter gave way to spring, the isolation of the Richter family deepened. The once welcoming German quarter now felt hostile, and Heinrich seriously began to consider leaving Milwaukee. But Emma, oblivious to the fear surrounding her, was far from finished with her calculations. Her journal grew thicker with complex notes and charts tracking human behavior, sequences of numbers, and maps of the neighborhood filled with symbols and measurements. The community's fear of Emma had turned into something more concrete. Children were kept away from their house, shopkeepers treated them coldly, and even Father Kohler limited his interactions to only the most formal church services. Dr. Friedrich Müller, the local physician, grew increasingly curious about Emma's abilities and, unlike the superstitions of others, saw her condition as a scientific puzzle. Heinrich eventually approached Dr. Müller privately, seeking his medical advice. The doctor agreed to examine Emma, and so one rainy Thursday morning, Emma was taken to his office. There, she answered the doctor's questions with the same precise, calculated answers she had given to everything else, her eyes fixed on some invisible formula only she could see. Dr. Müller leaned forward, his interest piqued despite the uncomfortable nature of the conversation. "Your father tells me you can predict when certain events will happen. Can you explain how you do this?" he asked Emma, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and caution. Emma met his gaze, her expression unshaken. "I observe patterns and calculate probabilities based on established behavioral data. People believe their actions are random, but they follow mathematical sequences. When I have enough data points, I can predict future behavior with high accuracy." Dr. Müller felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard rumors, but hearing Emma describe her methods in such a clinical way left him speechless. "Can you give me an example?" he asked, intrigued despite himself. Emma flipped through her journal, the pages filled with precise, neat numerical notations. "Mrs. Brennan believes she is keeping a secret, but her pattern is quite obvious. Every Tuesday and Friday for 8 weeks, she walks to the church at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. But instead of entering for prayer, she continues to the rectory and stays for 43 minutes. Father Kerr's pattern has changed too. He's been buying extra candles and wine, and his evening prayers have been 17 minutes longer on those days. The correlation is statistically significant." Dr. Müller's breath caught in his throat. The implications of what Emma was suggesting about the priest and the widow were scandalous, but it was the methodical way she documented it that disturbed him most. "How long have you been watching people like this?" he asked, his voice low. "Always," Emma replied, her voice as flat as ever. "Since I was very small. But I only started making calculations after I learned mathematics. The patterns became clearer then." Later, after the examination, Dr. Müller sat down with Heinrich and Greta. He was a trained physician, not a superstitious man, but what he had seen in Emma was far beyond anything he could explain. "Your daughter's mind works differently," he said carefully. "She processes information in a way that seems almost mechanical. In my opinion, this is a medical condition, not the supernatural explanation some people are suggesting." Though Dr. Müller tried to offer a scientific perspective, the growing fear surrounding Emma's predictions continued to build. 2 days later, Emma made another unsettling announcement. "There will be a fire at the Zimmerman house on Sunday evening," she said calmly. "It will start at 8:47 and spread to 3 nearby buildings before the volunteer fire brigade can respond. Mr. Zimmerman will not survive." Heinrich felt the familiar chill run through him. "Emma, you must not say such things," he said, trying to stay calm. "How could you possibly know about a fire?" Emma opened her journal, flipping to the appropriate page. "Mr. Zimmerman has been drinking lamp oil mixed with whiskey for 12 days. I observed him buying both in quantities that exceed normal household use. His wife left for Chicago yesterday, and that follows a pattern of wives leaving before significant incidents. The chimney has structural damage, based on the angle of the smoke and soot buildup. The probability of fire is 93%. Greta began to weep softly as Emma spoke in such a clinical, emotionless tone. The way her daughter talked about potential tragedy as though it were just another mathematical problem was more terrifying than any supernatural explanation could be. Heinrich, desperate to stop the disaster from unfolding, decided to warn Mr. Zimmerman. He found him at the brewery on Saturday night, drunk and smelling of lamp oil. Heinrich warned him about the fire, hoping to prevent it, but Zimmerman's response was laughter and mockery. Despite his warnings, the fire broke out at exactly 8:47 on Sunday evening. The flames spread quickly, consuming not only the Zimmerman home but 3 adjacent buildings before the volunteer fire brigade could do anything. Mr. Zimmerman's body was found in the kitchen, where he had apparently tried to put out the flames. The timing of the fire, down to the exact minute, confirmed Emma's prediction. The news of Emma's prediction spread fast, and the community's fear of her grew. What had once been curiosity and wonder turned into full-blown fear, and the Richter family was completely ostracized. People began to treat them like outcasts, avoiding them at church, excluding them from social events, and whispering behind their backs. Emma, however, seemed oblivious to the growing hostility. She continued to observe, calculate, and fill her journal with even more complex predictions. She had started creating probability matrices, analyzing multiple variables at once, and making predictions for weeks in advance. Greta couldn't bear to look at the journal anymore, fearing what Emma might be calculating about their own lives or the people around them. Then, one morning in late April, Emma noticed something unusual. Sitting by the kitchen window, she observed the street activity with her usual intensity. Suddenly, she looked up at her mother and said, "Mama, something's wrong with the pattern today." Greta, her hands trembling as she kneaded bread dough, asked, "What do you mean, Emma?" Emma opened her journal, flipping through the pages with practiced ease. Every Tuesday for 11 weeks, Mrs. Brennan has walked to the rectory at exactly 3:15. But today she left her house at 2:47 and walked toward the river instead. Her behavior shows significant distress. Her step length has decreased by 12%, and her breathing pattern is irregular. This suggests she is planning something final. Greta's heart stopped as Emma spoke with such cold precision. "You mustn't speak of such things," she said, her voice shaking. "Mrs. Brennan is a good woman. She would never—" "The probability is 87%, Emma interrupted, her tone as detached as if she were discussing the weather. People who change their patterns so dramatically while showing signs of distress often make irreversible decisions within 4 hours. Mrs. Brennan's pattern changed 43 minutes ago." Greta, horrified, ran to find Heinrich. "Heinrich, you must come quickly. Emma says Mrs. Brennan is going to harm herself. We have to do something." Heinrich, feeling the familiar dread he had come to associate with his daughter's predictions, followed Greta back to the house. He found Emma sitting calmly at the window, jotting down more notes in her journal as though observing a mere experiment. "Emma," he asked, his voice strained, "tell me exactly what you observed about Mrs. Brennan." "She deviated from her usual pattern by 28 minutes, Emma answered, looking up at him. "Her physical signs suggest severe emotional distress. Based on historical data of pattern disruption, the probability of self-harm is 87%. With peak likelihood occurring between 5 and 7 this evening." Heinrich's desperation finally gave way to acceptance. He left the house immediately and followed the path Emma had indicated toward the river. There, by the dock, he found Mrs. Brennan, staring into the dark waters with a look of deep despair. The chilling accuracy of Emma's predictions had led him here, and now, as he reached out to her, he realized that his daughter's gifts were no longer just a mystery, they were a profound burden. "Mrs. Brennan," Heinrich called softly, approaching carefully to avoid startling her. "Are you all right?" The elderly woman turned toward him, her eyes swollen from tears. "Heinrich, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaky. "I was concerned about you," he replied. "You seem troubled lately." Mrs. Brennan's face crumpled as she spoke, her words heavy with despair. "I can't bear it anymore, Heinrich. The shame, the whispers, knowing that everyone knows about my weakness. Father Collar says it's a sin, but I can't help how I feel about him. It's better to end it than live with this disgrace." Hinrich's heart sank as he realized that Emma's observations about Mrs. Brennan and Father Collar had been frighteningly accurate. The elderly woman was indeed contemplating suicide rather than face the shame of the scandal. With growing horror, Hinrich spent the next 2 hours talking Margaret Brennan away from the river, convincing her that shame was not worth dying for, and that the community's judgment would eventually fade. When Hinrich returned home that evening, he found Emma, sitting quietly, making final notations in her journal. "Mrs. Brennan didn't follow through with her plan," Emma remarked calmly. "The intervention changed the probability calculation. I will need to adjust my variables for future predictions involving third-party interference." Hinrich stood frozen, staring at his daughter. Emma had not only predicted the potential suicide, but she was now treating his intervention as just another data point for her calculations. The realization that his 11-year-old daughter was analyzing human suffering with such clinical detachment filled him with a horror that went beyond words. That night, as Emma peacefully slept in her narrow bed, Hinrich and Greta made a decision that would change their lives forever. They could no longer stay in Milwaukee. Emma's abilities, whatever they were, had made life in the German quarter unbearable. But more troubling than the community's growing fear of their daughter was the terrifying realization that Emma was not just observing human behavior, she was losing touch with the emotional realities of the tragedies she predicted. They quietly began making plans to leave Wisconsin, hoping to find somewhere where Emma's unusual mind could be free of fear and judgment. But Emma was not finished. The most disturbing revelations were still to come. On the first day of May, 1873, as Hinrich lay awake that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his daughter's mathematical mind had uncovered even darker truths. The precise, clinical way she spoke of human tragedy suggested she had been observing and recording more than anyone had realized. And she was still calculating. That morning, as sunlight streamed into their kitchen, Emma looked up from her journal. "Papa, I need to show you something important," she said, her calculating gray eyes focused on him. "My calculations have revealed a pattern that explains everything." Hinrich, who had been dreading this moment for weeks, reluctantly sat down across from her. Emma opened her journal to a section filled with detailed charts, maps, and numerical sequences that looked more like the work of a trained investigator than an 11-year-old child. "For 26 months, Emma began, her voice steady and precise, "I've been observing and recording the behavior patterns of 43 adults in our community." Hinrich's heart sank. What was his daughter telling him? "At first, I thought the patterns were random variations," Emma continued. "But when I analyzed the data systematically, I discovered correlations that point to organized criminal activity." Hinrich's blood ran cold. "Emma, what are you saying?" Emma consulted her charts with the calm efficiency of a professional. 7 men in our community have been meeting secretly every Wednesday at midnight in the basement of Kellner's Brewery. I calculated their movement patterns based on timing inconsistencies, observed deviations from normal behavior, and physical evidence of their meetings. She pointed to a detailed map of the German quarter, marked with symbols and measurements. "Mr. Steinberg tells his wife he works late on Wednesday nights, but he leaves the mill at the same time as the other 6 men and walks to the brewery using a route that avoids the main streets. The pattern has been consistent for 26 months, with only 3 exceptions that correlate with illness or family emergencies." Hinrich stared at the map, recognizing the names Emma had marked: Wilhelm Beer, Franz Kellner, Ernst's brother Hans Zimmermann, Franz's cousin Otto Steinberg, Klaus Brennan, Margaret's late husband, Gustav Wolf, and Hermann Kruger. "Emma, how could you possibly know about secret meetings?" "I observe everything, Papa," she replied, her voice as calm as ever. "Every night. Every movement. Every deviation from established patterns." Emma turned to another page filled with numerical calculations. "The meetings aren't the most significant discovery," she said. "My calculations indicate these 7 men have been systematically stealing from the brewery operations, with estimated losses of approximately $47,000 over the past 26 months. Hinrich's hands trembled as he read the figures. The sum was more money than most families in the German quarter would see in a lifetime. "How did you calculate that?" Emma explained with the same mathematical precision she applied to everything else. I noticed discrepancies between the reported beer production figures and the actual output based on observed deliveries, ingredients purchased, and waste disposal patterns. The difference indicated systematic theft, but I needed to identify the perpetrators. She pointed to detailed charts tracking the behavior of the 7 men. These individuals all showed consistent patterns of increased spending that didn't correlate with their reported incomes. Mr. Weber bought new furniture worth approximately $300. Mr. Steinberg sent money to relatives in Germany. I observed him at the post office 12 times with packages too large for normal correspondence. The pattern was consistent across all 7 men. Hinrich understood. His 11-year-old daughter had uncovered a criminal conspiracy. But Emma wasn't done. The theft operation required inside knowledge of brewery security and access to financial records, she continued. My calculations indicate that Ernst Kellner, the brewery owner, is the organizer of the theft ring. The final piece of Emma's revelation hit Hinrich like a punch to the gut. Kellner, the brewery owner who had been gradually freezing them out of the community, was allegedly the mastermind behind the theft ring involving the very men from their neighborhood. The precision of Emma's analysis, the certainty of her conclusions, and the detailed evidence she had gathered left no room for doubt. Emma, these are very serious accusations, Hinrich said, his voice filled with disbelief. Are you certain of your calculations? Emma consulted her journal one last time. The mathematical probability is 96%. But Papa, there's something else. Something that explains why Mr. Kellner has been isolating our family from the community. Hinrich's chest tightened with dread. What do you mean? Mr. Kellner knows that I observe everything, Emma said calmly. 3 weeks ago, he came to our house twice at night and stood outside for 17 minutes each time, as if calculating whether I might have discovered his secret. His behavior suggests he suspects I know about the theft operation. The realization that Emma's abilities had not only exposed a criminal conspiracy but had also made her a target filled Hinrich with a terror he had never known. His daughter had uncovered secrets that powerful men would kill to protect. Emma closed her journal and looked at her father with those unsettling gray eyes. Papa, my calculations indicate that we are in significant danger. Mr. Kellner and the others cannot allow me to continue making observations. The mathematical probability of them taking action against our family is 84%. The peak likelihood is within the next 72 hours. Hinrich understood in that moment. Emma's final prediction wasn't about fire, suicide, or adultery, it was about their own survival. Her calculations had exposed a truth too dangerous to ignore. The men she had uncovered would stop at nothing to eliminate the one person who could bring them all down. That evening, Hinrich made a decision that would save his family's life. Using the detailed evidence Emma had gathered, he approached Dr. Mueller under the cover of darkness and shared Emma's discoveries. The physician, already disturbed by Emma's unusual abilities, was stunned by the precision of her criminal investigation. Hinrich, Dr. Mueller whispered, looking over the journal by lamplight, if what Emma has calculated is true, we are looking at the largest theft operation in Milwaukee's history. More importantly, if Kellner suspects that Emma knows, your family is in mortal danger, Dr. Mueller warned, his voice serious. Dr. Mueller agreed to help them escape Milwaukee immediately. Using his medical connections, he arranged for Heinrich to receive an emergency job offer at a brewery in distant Minnesota, providing cover for their sudden departure. They would leave that very night, before Emma's 72-hour prediction could come true. As the Richter family packed their belongings into Dr. Mueller's wagon under the cover of darkness, Emma made one final observation that would haunt Hinrich for the rest of his life. Papa, she said calmly, in approximately 6 months, the theft operation will be discovered through other means. Mr. Kellner will face justice, but 3 of the 7 men will not survive the investigation. The mathematical probabilities are quite clear. Hinrich shuddered as he helped Emma into the wagon. Even as they fled for their lives, Emma was calculating the future consequences of the conspiracy she had uncovered. Her prediction would prove accurate in every detail. By winter, a federal investigation would expose the theft ring. Ernst Kellner would be arrested and convicted, and 3 of his accomplices would die under suspicious circumstances that were never fully explained. But on that dark May night in 1873, as their wagon rolled through the sleeping streets of Milwaukee's German Quarter, Heinrich could only think about how his daughter's extraordinary mathematical mind had both saved their lives and destroyed the only home they had ever known in America. The Richter family vanished from Milwaukee in the early hours of May 2, 1873, leaving behind only whispered stories and unanswered questions. Dr. Mueller reported that they had received an emergency family summons back to Bavaria, but the few who inquired found no ship records confirming their departure. What the residents of the German Quarter never learned was that Heinrich, Greta, and Emma had indeed traveled to Minnesota, where Heinrich found work at a small brewery in New Ulm. Dr. Mueller had sworn to keep their location a secret, understanding that Emma's abilities would always make her a target for those who feared the exposure of their secrets. In New Ulm, the Richter family tried to build a new life far from the whispers and fears that had driven them away from Milwaukee. Heinrich found his work at the brewery familiar and satisfying, while Greta slowly began rebuilding the domestic routines shattered by Emma's unsettling predictions. But Emma herself remained unchanged. Her mathematical mind continued to observe, calculate, and record human behavior patterns with the same mechanical precision that had made her both famous and feared. Dr. Mueller maintained correspondence with the family for several months, reporting that Emma had begun working with a mathematics professor at a nearby college who was fascinated by her unusual abilities. The professor, a German immigrant named Dr. Hermann Weiss, approached Emma's condition from a scientific perspective, helping her understand and channel her observational skills in ways that might prove beneficial rather than destructive. The most significant revelation came in November 1873, when Dr. Mueller received a letter from Heinrich, containing Emma's final prediction about the Milwaukee theft operation. As she had calculated with mathematical precision, federal investigators had indeed uncovered Ernst Kellner's conspiracy. Kellner was arrested and convicted of embezzling over $50,000 from multiple brewery operations. Wilhelm Weber, Kellner's primary accomplice, was found dead in his home under circumstances ruled a suicide, though many suspected foul play. Otto Steinberg and Hermann Kruger also died within weeks of the investigation's conclusion, Steinberg in what appeared to be a drunken accident and Kruger from what Dr. Mueller diagnosed as a sudden heart attack, with suspicious similarities to certain poisons. Emma's mathematical analysis of the criminal conspiracy had been accurate in every detail, including her prediction that not all of the conspirators would survive the eventual discovery of their crimes. The precision of her calculations, even from hundreds of miles away and months in advance, confirmed what Heinrich had come to understand about his daughter's extraordinary and terrifying abilities. The German Quarter of Milwaukee slowly recovered from the scandal and tragedy of 1873. The brewery theft investigation brought unwelcome attention from federal authorities but also exposed a level of corruption that had quietly damaged the community for years. New families moved into the houses left empty by death and departure, and the tight-knit community gradually rebuilt itself around more honest foundations. But the story of Emma Richter, the pale girl with the calculating gray eyes who could predict death and expose secrets through mathematical observation, became part of the neighborhood's whispered folklore. Parents used her story to warn their children about the dangers of knowing too much, while adults quietly wondered what other secrets might be hiding behind the ordinary facades of their neighbors' lives. Father Kohler, who had initially blessed Emma's abilities as divine gifts, later confessed to Dr. Mueller that the girl's mathematical predictions had shaken his faith in ways he could not explain. The priest began to question whether some knowledge was too dangerous for human minds to possess, and whether Emma's condition was a blessing or a curse that had been visited upon their community. The story of Emma Richter continued to haunt Milwaukee long after her disappearance. Some believed her abilities had been a gift from God, while others whispered that they were a curse. Her precise observations and mathematical predictions had exposed dark secrets and led to dangerous revelations, leaving a community forever changed by the girl who could calculate human behavior with terrifying accuracy. By the spring of 1874, nearly a year after the Richter family's departure, Dr. Mueller sent a final letter to Heinrich, reporting that the German Quarter had largely returned to normal. However, Emma's story continued to circulate in whispered conversations among the older residents. He also shared a disturbing development that had emerged during the federal investigation of the brewery theft. Government investigators had discovered that Emma's journal, which Heinrich had left with Dr. Mueller as evidence, contained mathematical calculations that extended far beyond the immediate criminal conspiracy. Emma had apparently been tracking and analyzing behavioral patterns throughout the entire German immigrant community, creating detailed profiles of dozens of families and predicting future events with remarkable accuracy. The federal investigators, trained in criminal analysis, were both impressed and disturbed by the sophistication of Emma's observational methods. "Your daughter's mind works in ways that professional investigators might envy," Dr. Mueller wrote. "But I confess that I am grateful she is far from Milwaukee. The precision of her observations and the mathematical certainty of her predictions represent a kind of knowledge that I fear is too dangerous for any community to possess." The final mention of Emma Richter in any historical record comes from a brief notation in the New Ulm College Mathematics Department records from 1875. Professor Hermann Weiss reported that his special student had demonstrated unprecedented abilities in statistical analysis and behavioral prediction, but that her family had decided to relocate once again for personal reasons. After that entry, Emma Richter disappeared from history as completely as she had vanished from Milwaukee on that dark night in May of 1873. What happened to the girl who could calculate human behavior with mathematical precision remains unknown. Some researchers have theorized that families like the Richters, possessing children with extraordinary abilities, deliberately maintain their anonymity to protect themselves from both scientific exploitation and community persecution. Emma's story represents one of the few documented cases where such abilities were recorded in sufficient detail to understand their scope and implications. This mystery reminds us that the human mind remains one of our greatest enigmas, capable of developing extraordinary abilities that challenge our understanding of intelligence, observation, and prediction. In 1873, Emma Richter's mathematical approach to human behavior was seen as either divine or demonic. But modern science recognizes that conditions like savant syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, and hyperthymesia can create minds that process information in ways that seem almost supernatural to those who don't understand the neurological mechanisms involved. What do you think of Emma's story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or do you think her abilities went even further than we know? Leave a comment below and let us know if you've ever encountered someone with extraordinary mental abilities. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. These historical cases show that the most frightening truths are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right mind to uncover them. Emma Richter's case proves that some of the most terrifying discoveries come not from supernatural forces, but from the relentless application of mathematical logic to human behavior. In a world where we think our secrets are safe, minds capable of such precise observation remind us that privacy may be nothing more than an illusion.